Well, hello. Welcome, everybody, to another Green Biz webcast. Today, we're sponsored by Rubicon Carbon, and our topic is accelerating climate action with diversified carbon removal portfolios. I'm Margaret Morales. I'm the director of the carbon program at Green Biz Group. And as always, I'm thrilled to welcome you all to a conversation about climate solutions. All right, before we begin and get into it, I'm going to take us through the mandatory housekeeping. I'll just point out a couple of bells and whistles we have here on our platform today. If you look on the left side of your screen, you should see a number of tabs. One of them says live. That will allow you to watch the webcast live here. There is also a Q&A box there. And if you have a question for our speakers during our conversation, please put them there. I will reserve at least 15 minutes at the end to get through as many questions as possible. There's also a chat box. And if you have a technical problem, if something's not working for you, you can put your question in the chat box and our team will help you. To submit a question, you do need to set up your profile on Gradual, and you can do that by clicking in the top right corner. You should see an option to edit profile. Let's see. So the other features I should point out real quick are there's a button that says people that'll allow you to see other folks tuning in today. And there's a button that says resources, and we have a number of things there that you can go to download. I'll walk through them more thoroughly at the end, but there are a number of resources related to carbon removals. Let's see, I think that's all. And then there's the help tab, of course. If you have a technical issue, you can also put it there, but I recommend using the chat box. That'll be a little quicker. Oh, and I should mention, this is, of course, being recorded, and we'll be sending out the recording to everyone who registered for today's webcast later today. So, okay, housekeeping done. Now into the discussion. We'll be talking about carbon removal credits today. Removals made up just 3% of carbon credits sold on the voluntary carbon market last year, but they are growing very quickly, both in terms of market share, but also in terms of how companies are thinking about them as part of a net zero strategy. So we are going to talk through three things related to removals today. First, just the state of the various types of carbon removal solutions. Secondly, we'll talk through challenges in this industry from scale to price and due diligence. And we'll most importantly talk about buyer perspectives and how buyers are thinking about this as a part of high impact climate strategies. I am thrilled to have three really deep experts on this panel with me today. I have Nina Berger, who is the Vice President of Climate Solutions at Choose, Amishi Claros, who's the Head of Removals and Industrials at Rubicon Carbon, and Sam Israelit, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer at Bain. So thank you all so much for making time to be here. With that, we're going to kick off with an overview of the state of carbon removal solutions, and I'm going to hand it over to Amishi to walk us through. So Amishi, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah, awesome. As mentioned, my name is Mishi, and I just wanted to open first with a big and sincere thank you. It means a lot that you guys registered and are attending today, and we really appreciate that you guys came here. I've worked in carbon management space for a while now. I've been at the DOE and was there when CDR was just starting to come to the forefront. And it's been amazing how much it's taken off and how much that community has been established. And I love it. I just think it uses a lot of jargon, right? Like I said, CDR, I should have said carbon dioxide removal. It's got a lot of terms in it. So sometimes it can feel alienating. But the thing is, CDR isn't crazy complicated. That complexity, that nuance that we feel, it comes from the fact that there's just a lot of approaches that come under this umbrella term of CDR. So it's great that we have a ton of shots on goal, but it's also important for us to distinguish all of these shots from one another because each pathway has its own set of benefits and compromises. So today I just wanted to do a little technical walkthrough because I'm a scientist and that's really what I like to do if I have some people. But it also gives us some context before we dive into the panel, which I'm really, really pumped for. So thanks again, and let's start from the beginning. Climate change. I will not give too much about climate change because I don't have time. So I'm going to have this working assumption that we all think CO2 is a bummer and we got to do something about it. So there's a couple things that we can do, right? Carbon avoidance projects. That's what you have seen a lot of in this voluntary carbon market space. A carbon avoidance credit is a credit that represents 1 ton of CO2 that would have otherwise been emitted from a project emitted without a project activity. So this is kind of like a renewable energy project, avoiding the emissions from a fossil fuel plant. Then you have this other type of project, carbon removals projects. And a removal credit represents 1 ton of CO2 that's been removed from the atmosphere and our ocean and durably stored because of a project activity. These projects aren't tied to a point source of emissions like a power plant or a landfill or an industrial facilities. These projects are targeting these legacy emissions in the atmosphere that have built up and diffused into our oceans. They're removing that carbon dioxide and taking them out from play. We'll dig into these carbon removal pathways throughout the presentation and in the panel. So I really like this slide, mostly because it shows a really nice step back view of the complexities that you have in your CDR pathways. And there's a distinct set of benefits and compromises that come with each pathway. A great place to start if you want to dig into any one of these technologies is the CDR primer. Maybe a step up is RMI's Applied Innovation Roadmap, which is a little bit more of a technical document, goes over like 30 plus approaches, but we adapted this graphic from the UN report because we could center it around a couple core themes, the capture mechanism and the storage medium. I think if you distill CDR down, capture and storage are the key scientific aspects that drive cost and durability. Cost and durability drive financial risk. Every stakeholder in the CDR community has to deal with financial risk. Generally speaking, less complicated capture, less durable storage means less cost. That's this left side of the graph, and I'll dig into a couple of those. More complicated capture, more durable storage mediums means more cost. And that's more on the right side of this graph. And I'll dig into a couple of those as well. So as you can tell, we've got like 4 things we got to dig into, and we'll try to fly through this technical walkthrough. The first is nature-based removals. This is the one that most people have comfort with. It's actually covered by others on the science team. Another reason I'm going to breeze through it. But the most common type of project you'll see is ARR, or afforestation and reforestation. The graphic in the middle is a little technical walkthrough of what a typical process is. You'll have degraded land or barren land, and you will plant some trees. In terms of afforestation, it means establishing new trees and new tree forest cover in an area where trees or forests didn't exist. Reforestation is replanting trees on recently deforested lands. From a carbon perspective, both afforestation and reforestation store that carbon in that neat biomass. So that's step 3. That's that new or restored forest system that's photosynthetically drawing down carbon dioxide, storing it in the biomass, and as well as in the soil carbon. The main benefit here is that biological capture mechanism, it's the most cost effective and the most scalable way to remove CO2, period. The main challenge, though, is the fact that this deployment relies on a really vast open system. So the drawback is monitoring, reporting, and verification, MRV. That's another umbrella term that you'll hear me say often. It's a group of activities, right, that's all about tracking that carbon dioxide. You want to, if you're paying for it, you want to make sure that the carbon that you're paying for is quantified right. You want to make sure it's monitored and stays there, and you want to verify that. So all of these activities that track that carbon dioxide fall under this term of MRV, generally speaking. So MRV in a system like this, big open forest system, ends up being harder. Next, we'll go to another biological capture process that I call bikers. So it's biomass carbon removal and storage. I like this graphic. I know it's a little busy, but it's versatile. So bikers, right, pathway is another umbrella term. You're gonna pick up that I'm using a lot of umbrella terms, but it's really helpful, right? It's all the things you can do with biomass, which is a ton of different things. On the left side, you're starting with this initial carbon drawdown, the same thing that you had with your nature-based solutions. It's cheap, easy, boom, you get your carbon locked away. Then you need to source sustainable biomass. Keyword there being sustainable. This can be residues from forest management, agricultural debris. It can also be municipal solid waste. That's that little truck coming from the city. We tried to cover all these little options. So it's all these organic waste that didn't really have any other value or use. They're then processed in something we're calling like the conversion facility, right? That's step number 3. It's this one facility that you are converting the biomass into something else. It can be a ton of different technologies that you deploy here. It can be pyrolysis, heating with that oxygen, combustion, that would be heating with oxygen, hydrothermal liquefaction, fermentation, gasification, a ton of different things. But regardless of whatever you do, you're going to have your products fall into one of these 3 categories. First is you can have CO2 or your bioproduct go to dedicated geologic storage. That's a high durability trap, right? Like say if you're doing combustion in that facility, you could capture that CO2 off that smokestack and put it underground. If you were doing pyrolysis and getting a bio-oil fraction, you could put that in geologic storage as well. The second category is bioproducts for disposal or application. So say if you were doing pyrolysis again, you can have a biochar fraction. You could apply that to a field. If you had biomass and you dried it, compressed it, cased it, you had a little biobrick, you could throw that into a landfill and that could be a disposal. That's another option. And our final option is this catch-all. It kind of says other co-products. Sometimes with biomass projects, you aren't just looking at the carbon value, you're also pulling other values out of that biomass, right? If you're combusting it, you could be using that heat to generate electricity. If you were fermenting in your facility, you could be creating ethanol. So there are other products that you could be generating from your biker's facility or your conversion process. Similar to ARR, it's highly feasible. It's photosynthetic. We have biomass available. The sustainability aspect is something you need to dig into and make sure you're sourcing well, but it's still scalable and feasible. The MRV also is a little bit easier than ARR. In the middle right there, we have that facility. It's a lot more constrained and defined. So MRV is a lot more easier to execute in Biker's process compared to ARR. But the trade-off is a higher cost. You're having a lot more steps that involve people, you're procuring biomass, you're processing it, you're transporting it, sometimes even paying for that final fate of the bioproduct. All those add to the cost. And that's the trade-off that you'll have, your benefits and your compromises. If we switch gears and we talk about a different type of capture mechanism, right? A geochemical one, we can come to things like enhanced rock weathering. I really like this idea that rocks, I'm a geologist. You'll get that vibe. This idea that rocks affect climate isn't new. Ramo et al., which was an awesome female geologist in 1992, had a pivotal Nature paper. It was like, the Himalayas affect climate. And you're like, what? We were putting all these rocks up into the atmosphere. They were weathering down. They were actually drawing down CO2. So for enhanced rock weathering, we're doing that just like on a much smaller scale, and we have to do it so much faster. So when we say ERW, there's a couple steps that we got to take. We got to process our rocks. You got to get the right rocks. Don't let anyone tell you all rocks are created equal. Some have the right cations that you need. You need iron, magnesium, calcium, whatever it may be. But you got to take those rocks and you got to process them into the appropriate specifications. Fancy way of being like, we just need rock dust. The smaller it is, the faster it can react. So you get your rock dust and then you spread it on a field, usually a cropland, some areas that you have characterized, because you want to know the soil that it's engaging with, right? So if you've characterized your farmlands, that's really helpful. And then the next step is this rainfall. Rainfall has a little bit of CO2 absorbed into it in the form of carbonic acid. It's that taste that you get if you've ever drank rainwater before. So that rainwater that's a little acidic will hit your tiny rocks on the surface of your fields. And that's where you get your weathering reaction going on. And your rock will actually weather away into its components, its ions. And that carbonic acid, that carbon that was in the rainwater, gets locked up as a bicarbonate ion. So those are the little red circles that we have throughout this graph. That buffered runoff really will follow the fate of water. Some will go into the water table, some will go into streams, rivers, valleys, oceans, right? So that will be the ultimate fate of that locked away bicarbonate that you have. There's a couple big benefits that I really like about ERW. Like this idea of spreading something onto a field isn't really new for agriculture. They have confidence, they have capabilities to do so. But the drawback, again, is the openness of the system, right? We're talking about really big natural processes. We're talking about rainfall over fields. We're talking about rivers. We're talking about ocean dynamics. All of that adds up to a more complicated and more costly monitoring, reporting, and verification in MRB regime. And finally, my other favorite is direct air capture. We worked on this a lot. This has been an area that the carbon management space has been super excited about. And it's a really interesting engineered concept, right? And it's pretty simple. So you'll have an air contactor as your first step. So that's number one. Air contactors, if they're active, will have big fans. And the idea is you want a lot of air to come through because you want your CO2 molecules to contact a capture medium. A capture medium can be a solvent, liquid, a sorbent, kind of like a sponge, or it could be like a membrane, kind of like a filter, and you want it to hold on to your CO2 molecule. Now that you've captured your CO2 molecule, your medium is loaded, you want it to let go of that CO2, right? You spent a lot of time engineering this really complicated medium. So you'll have to give it some kind of resource. You're going to have to give it heat or electrons or temperature or pressure or a vacuum, something to swing off that CO2 molecule and reuse that medium. So after you do that, you can get this pure stream of CO2 that you can compress and transport. And you have a couple of options when you're looking at a CDR system, right? You can send it to a durable product, like curing it in concrete or a synthetic ag, or you can inject it underground for geologic storage. Both are really high durability options for that CO2 that you've created and come out with. So what are we doing when we're investing in CDR right now? Like, what does the market look like? We've talked about these projects, and the market right now is really dominated by these advanced market commitments or offtakes, people being like, I'll pay you for the credits that you generate mostly into the future. And it's this investment into this singular project. So you're investing in these particular dots. So you've concentrated your investment into that set of benefits and that set of compromises. So if I was you, what CDR would you invest in? According to this graph, you would want to invest in the upper left corner. And there's nothing there. There's really not a lot of durable and affordable projects. That technology isn't there. So what you're seeing are these like buy regimes, right? Some people are investing in durable but expensive projects. These ones like DAC and direct air capture and direct ocean capture, really trying to move the market towards growth and towards commercial scale in the hopes that they come down a cost curve. You have other folks that are investing in temporary and affordable solutions, right? They're looking to make an impact now. And that's in this lower left corner where you have ARR projects. And then you have a new kind of group of folks that are thinking about these temporary removals, but also have a premium associated with them because they have a co-benefit. Perhaps it's biodiversity or something, or water, where they're willing to pay that premium because this temporary removal credit has something else attached to it beyond just a carbon value. It's still a really nuanced question, but Rubicon has a different approach as well. We are building carbon credit portfolios. We demonstrated it before. There's no singular carbon project that hits every single quadrant, hits every single goal. So by combining all of these projects or a spectrum of these projects into a single investment, such as our Rubicon Carbon ton, we can balance this diversity of benefits and compromises into a singular high impact investment that can meet immediate demands. This is just like an illustrative graphic really, but you can kind of see that there's four technologies that are blended into this portfolio, which balances the risks and hedges the costs across them. This portfolio is also actively managed over time. So over the decades, you can see the portfolio's composition will change depending on how technologies mature and how they come down price curves and cost curves. So active management means that buyers aren't locked into this singular technology at the point of investment at current prices. We have a white paper that's coming out, and we'll talk about this in a lot more detail because I can't do it justice in 10 minutes. So I would definitely stay tuned for that. But I think it's really important to see a visual and talk through it because I spent a lot of time today, and I will likely, like tout like emerging technologies. I think they're great, but it's also good to have this idea that, some of them may not be like the cost curve of technology number two. They won't come down dramatically. Some of them might be technology one or technology three, where the cost curves don't come down quick enough or they don't scale enough. That's why we need an all of the above approach whenever we're talking about avoidance or we're talking about removals, because it's really important for us to not conflate these two. Low durability does not mean low integrity. You can have a high integrity solution, a high climate impact decision through diversification. I'm pretty sure I have hit my 10 minutes, and I really just want to say thank you. And I'm so pumped for the panel. So thank you guys. And let's go. Back to you, Margaret.
All right, thank you, Amishi. We're not supposed to have favorite children, but your geology vibe, I'm feeling like ERW is your favorite child. All right, thank you so much. I should mention before I start grilling our panelists, I think Rubicon Carbon is running a survey about demand for carbon removals. So if you're active in the carbon markets or thinking about becoming active, there should be a link to that survey in the chat box, and you should check it out. Okay, so now let's dive into the fun stuff. I want to start basically big picture, like what is going on here? What is driving this interest in carbon removals? This is sort of a new phase for carbon markets. And Sam, if you don't mind, I want to start with you. And I'll first just say congratulations. Huge news yesterday that Bain set the first ever platinum level carbon integrity claim with VCMI. So
Yeah,
how are you thinking about removals as a part of Bain's climate strategy?
yeah, thank you. It's great to be here and speak to everyone about this. We started moving to a carbon removals portfolio 3 years ago. Bain was one of the first kind of professional services firms to actually become carbon neutral back in 2012. And we bought kind of like everyone else back then. But as we started to look at it and think about our strategy, what really resonated with our key stakeholders, who are our employees and our clients, we realized that we needed to actually take more aggressive action and be more ambitious. And so we switched to a pure removals portfolio. It addresses our carbon legacy. So, the carbon that we have emitted over time, over the history of Bain & Company, we're starting to address that. So we actually buy in excess of our carbon footprint every year just to start to address that legacy. And from a pure strategy perspective, a carbon removal is hard to argue with, right? An avoidance credit you can get, and there are roles for avoidance credits that are very good. But for us, if we emit 100 tons of CO2 on a flight or 200 tons of CO2 on a flight, then if we take that out of the atmosphere, our net impact is zero. And so we really made that commitment to be net zero, net negative on our carbon because it's important to our stakeholders.
Okay, it's hard to argue with. Nina, I'm curious, with Choose, you have perspective into a lot of different kinds of buyers, both individuals and enterprise buyers. So what are you seeing? How are they thinking about removals?
Yeah, so to provide just a little bit more context, the way Choose works is we'll work with a partner, say an airline, and then their end customers as well. So that airline's consumer, corporate cargo customers as well. And so in terms of what we are seeing, it really depends, depending on those different audiences. Increasingly, we see our partners, say an airline, caring a great deal about removals. So in my role, I spend a lot of time working with our partners, understanding what their requirements are for building a portfolio of solutions, and then working with them to build that. When I started with Choose about 2 years ago, lots of requirements would come up, but whether or not something was a removal wasn't necessarily a part of it. Today, recently, partners might not be doing what Bain is doing and saying we're only focusing on removals, but they do want to talk about removals versus avoidance as part of that conversation. So we're seeing a very real uptick in terms of removal interest from our enterprise partners. You then look at their customers, particularly consumers. I think it's really interesting there. And at least to date, based on the data that we see, we don't actually see consumers say offsetting flights more frequently if it's all removals versus offsetting flights with a portfolio of avoidance. The data is just not showing that yet. Something the data does show that's quite interesting is the extent to which a consumer is going through this process of supporting these solutions appears to be very, very directly tied to how simple and accessible it is, right? Like, is it integrated into the booking flow, or do you need to go to a different website in order to do that? And Amishi, I think it's really interesting because it goes back to how you framed up the opening. Like there is all this complexity there, and we can do our very, very best to simplify it. But I think when we, all of us here, if you're spending this time with us, you care about removals, you want to see more removals, you're interested in them. I think the challenge for all of us is like, how do we make it very, very accessible and very, very simple for all consumers without disrespecting the nuance and the complexity?
Okay, I'm going to go right there. I want to go to the pain points because this is okay. I think there are a number of big pain points with removals. So I want to talk through each of them. The first one in my mind is price. These are very expensive. Amishi's, or they can be expensive. Let me put it that way. Amishi's chart showed that some removals are going for over $1,000 a ton, and many are going for over $100 a ton. So how do buyers think about a budget that includes budget for removals? And Sam, again, if you don't mind, I'll start with you. What are conversations like at Bain when you talk about a carbon removals purchasing budget?
Yeah, so we establish a budget for what we want to spend on offsets to reduce our footprint. It's based on, our historical experience for what we can, the price we can get for removals. And then we step back and think it's important to define what's the optimal portfolio. So if you look at our portfolio, 2/3, or actually 95% of our portfolio is nature-based right now. And so a lot of the technology-based or more advanced removals that she was talking about, it's still nascent. There's still a lot of innovation going on, and the price is very high. It's important to start investing in those projects to start showing support and build demand kind of momentum. But we're not going to go spend $1,000 a ton on all of our footprint, because that would just be crazy, prohibitively expensive. And so we follow the Oxford principles, which basically says a small portion of your portfolio, increasing it every year over the next 50 years. And let's make sure that we are starting to invest in those technologies and support them as they come down the cost curve. The rest of it's nature-based. And so we set a target price for a nature-based removal. And we work with companies like Rubicon to define what are the right types of projects, very high quality. We have a thorough diligence process to make sure that we're actually getting very good high quality removals. And can we get them at the right price? And then it becomes a portfolio decision. And we spend a lot of time thinking about different alternatives for these types of investments.
Okay, and that, Sam, is making me think about Amishi's slide that showed how the mix in the portfolio changed over time, in large part because of how the technology cost changes over time, or at least that was one factor. So Amishi, I'm curious to hear more about people that you talk to at Rubicon. Like, how are buyers talking about price?
Yeah, I think that's a lot of what the price pain is similar to the previous question, right? Price is one of those competing factors. Like you can try to make this as easy as possible. Creating a portfolio solution takes a lot of the due diligence that some folks can't afford to do. They don't have a big team. They don't have the in-house expertise. Creating that package helps, to Nina's point, make that decision easier. But the other thing that happens is you are going to be working within the price points that people can afford to pay for the removals. That's why a blended approach is, I think, a very admirable approach. It creates a little bit more of a cost-effective, more accessible price point. And to Sam's point, these portfolios will be changing along Oxford principles, right? You will be getting, as things come down the technology cost curves, you will be getting new technologies into your portfolio. So what you bought, and if you hold, the composition would be, dramatically different, hopefully like within a decade or maybe within 5 if we're lucky. So I do think the portfolio approach and the all of the above really helps address that pain point that comes to price.
Okay. Okay, second pain point on my mind is some of this technology is like as old as the hills, and some of it is nascent. That was a geologist joke for you, Amishi. Okay, some of it is nascent, and most companies probably are not set up to do massive due diligence on new and emerging technologies. So that can be really overwhelming, I think, especially for leaner sustainability teams. So I'm curious how each of you has thought about due diligence on, if you have a portfolio of these things, there's a lot of different mechanisms for removing the carbon. How do you do diligence in a way that you feel confident with the purchases? Amishi, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. And I did not take your geology joke for granted. But anyways, this idea of due diligence, right? It's tough. We have a science team and we have a finance team. We work together to due diligence these projects because there's a lot of different types of risks that go into it. So you can rely on others. In the case that a lot of people do, there's consulting firms, there's us, there's a ton of people out there that can help you navigate this space. But I think it's really important for folks to have their North Star. Like you have to figure out what you care about, and you can kind of craft a portfolio around that. And I say that because, right, like a portfolio that is dedicated to risk mitigation, like you want the safest package, that portfolio will look different than someone else that is like, advocating for co-benefits. So having that North Star set from the beginning while you're navigating this really difficult space that's really dynamic will help you. For us, like we're a buyer as well. Like we own all of ours, so we've had to go through these same pain points. We own our financial risk. So that's a calculated decision whenever we invest into these projects. The other thing is our projects have to be ex post. Like our credits have to be ex post. Like we have to have the credits to retire now. So that really was a different like aha moment on us. Availability became the moment that like a part of our removals portfolio that I hadn't originally invested when I started with Rubicon. So similar to what Sam said, that drove the composition of our package, right? A lot of it is nature based. So I think that North Star, it's really worth tapping into, and I think others have leaned really into that heavy durability space, and that's really good for them. And it's just worth talking within your company and figuring out what you really want to lean into and what you'll center around.
Okay, super interesting. So Nina, I'm curious, how do you see people setting that North Star?
Ooh, I was going to talk about our diligence process. No, in terms of setting the North Star, the way I think about it, like Choose works with the diversity of partners. Some folks already have a very, very, very clear North Star, right? They have established that and they've established it for a long time. And we are working with them to help operationalize it in the context of a software-powered multifaceted carbon program. Then other folks will come to us and they have no idea what they want. And that's totally okay. That's totally okay. And they're looking to have conversations with us to understand based on what else we are seeing in the market, how to think about it, et cetera, et cetera. And then fact of the matter is most people are somewhere in the middle on that spectrum, right? So they want to hear what we are hearing in the market and seeing in the market. They also have some sense of the approach that they want to go ahead and to take. Choose works a lot in travel, transportation, shipping, logistics, right? These like very hard to abate sectors. And a lot of the conversation and thinking about the North Star is saying like, here's what we can do today, and here's how we're going to talk about it and talk about like what is hard and what is easy. And then here is what we are working towards. And so I think a lot of the North Star establishment piece in the context of our partnerships has to do with communications and like how you are thinking about it in many different phases and how you are talking about it with your external stakeholders.
Okay. And I would love to hear about your due diligence process. I didn't want to cut you off. Tell me about that.
No, I was going to say, so like really practical nuts and bolts, chooses diligencing any project that we work with. We primarily do that in-house. It is hard with these tech-based removals, right? The technology is very, very different and very, very new. In the instance in which we're working with one of those, sometimes we'll work with an external consultant who like spends all day, every day thinking about that very specific narrow piece of technology. So that's how we operationalize it. And then there's an element of working with suppliers who we know and trust their diligence as well. And then there's also a piece of recognizing and having this conversation with our partners. Nothing is perfect. Wish it was, but like none of this is perfect. There are going to be strengths and weaknesses, kind of risks and opportunity areas associated with any project that you're working with. And we see our job as being really clear about that. And we encourage our partners to be really clear about that too.
Sam, what about you? How does Bain set its North Star and or do the due diligence on what you purchase?
Yeah, I think Nina made a really good point around the communication. I mean, I think a lot of this for us comes down to what's the story we want to tell and to whom. And so what do we want to say to clients? What do we want to say to the people who work at Bain? And, you know, what's going to be inspiring to them and compelling and get them wanting to support what we're doing. And so, you know, the way you do that is talk to them, ask them. I mean, you know, we have a, you know, particularly opinionated young workforce who is not shy about telling us what they believe in for the planet. And so listening to them, that really drove a lot of our strategy around, you know, them saying they wanted us to actually, they said, you're doing a lot of the right things. We want you to do more. And here's what it is. And so we use that to inform kind of how we approach the offset projects in which we're investing. We also go talk to our clients and say, what are they doing? And, you know, is this important to them? And where are they headed? And decarbonization has become a huge topic for our clients. They're starting to, you know, we're not just a consulting company, we're also a supplier to many of these companies. And so when you think about value chain mitigation, we're in their value chain. And so they're asking us to be accountable for, you know, driving our carbon footprint down and offsetting what we're doing so that we have a net negative or, you know, at least a net zero impact on their particular carbon footprint as well. And you put that together to tell the story. I said earlier, you know, there's a clear role for avoidance offsets. I'm not saying you should never buy an avoidance offset. For our story, removals made a lot of sense. And so I think you really have to be nuanced about that.
Okay. Well, I think actually you're flagging another big elephant in the room, I think, that comes with removals, which is we know for the climate, avoiding emissions, reducing emissions is essential. We will not stabilize our climate if we don't keep our forests standing and a number of other things. Okay, so how I will say something that keeps me up at night is removals are hard to argue with. And yet, if we only do removals, there is so much other climate work that needs to happen that is not a removal. It's avoiding emissions. So I'm curious how buyers are thinking about like balancing that. And so Nina, like, are you hearing from buyers they want only removal portfolios, or what are you hearing?
Okay, so the very honest response is we haven't heard from folks just yet, maybe with one or two exceptions, that they want only removals. Some of that has to do with budget. Some of it has to do with budget as opposed to like, here is our philosophy and kind of stance on engaging in VCM. I do personally, philosophically, feel really, really, really strongly that we need all of the things all at once. And it's kind of cheesy, but the metaphor that sticks with me is it's a silver buckshot, not a silver bullet that we need in addressing this, yada, yada, yada. So from a philosophical perspective and like caring about climate and feeling a lot of urgency there, I think there's a very, very strong case for avoidance and removals at the same time. And we do hear that from our partners. I think that resonates with our partners. There's then another piece to it that goes back to the, you're presenting a portfolio of solutions to your end consumers. And that is a very diverse and very broad audience. And I think there is a strategy there to make sure that you're using a very diverse set of removals and avoidance credits. So, for example, we may not all think rocks are as rocking as this crew here, or like, I think biochar is very sexy, but most people think biochar looks like dirt, right? Like those solutions aren't necessarily going to resonate with the general public. And so if you have a portfolio that is just biochar and mineralization, a lot of people might click through it. It might be like a little too much of a mental leap there. However, if you have a portfolio that has a very strong improved forest management project in there, and perhaps you're working with both their avoidance and removal credits, and there is strong biodiversity co-benefits in a region that your audience is likely to care about, and then biochar is a slice of that portfolio as well, you might be more likely to appeal to a broader audience and also educate a broader audience on a topic that they might not otherwise care about. So again, I think like philosophically need it all, and we hear that from our partners. And then just from an operational, practical perspective of getting these out there, there's a very real, legitimate strategy to taking a diverse approach.
Can I double click on that and just like absolutely like want to support everything that Nina just said? We had to grapple with that exact same thing. Like people have their North Star, they have what they're comfortable with. We actually have to we crafted a whole new concept of build your own portfolio, like BYOP. Because people do, they have strong opinions on what they care about and what their North Star is and what their comfort points are with different types. So you can have a portfolio that, you've worked with finance teams and investment teams, and it's like financial risk is diversified, geopolitical risk is diversified, like capture risk is diversified, technical risk, like all of these things that, we're trying to hedge risk in all sense, but it may not speak to your consumer. So this, like, we've actually had, yeah, that totally 100% can agree with what you're saying and have had to like adapt to that kind of mindset amongst consumers when you have portfolio solutions.
The other thing, Margaret, I'd say to your kind of concerns around how do you conserve versus, just pure removals is a little bit of, do what this, your offset strategy needs to be part of a broader engagement strategy with what you're going to do for the planet. I mean, like, let's be clear, most companies emit more emissions in a day than Bain & Company emits in a year. And, so we're relatively small. So yes, we can get to net zero, but the real impact on the planet isn't that big. By far and away, the biggest impact we can have on climate change is helping our clients decarbonize and helping our social impact partners to conserve land. And so we also have a strategy around that. I mean, that's one of the other hats I wear is I've been leading the environmental pillar of our social impact practice, where we are investing in nonprofits. And by investing, I mean dedicating team capacity to working on projects around conservation. So that's how we fill that part of the portfolio, not through an offset strategy.
Okay, this has been really cool. All right, we only have 15 minutes left, and I promised the audience I would spend 15 minutes on audience Q&A, and we have a lot of questions. So I'm going to do my best to get through as many as possible. All right, so here we go. So here's a really interesting question. How reasonable is it to monitor a carbon removal for 1,000 years? and who is taking that liability on? Amishi, would you want to start with that? Like, how do you think 1,000 years, like, who's going to be around to find out if that really worked out?
Yeah, that is a very fair question. And usually when you're talking about like long-term liability, past a century, you're in the interface of like geologic storage, right? Reservoirs. So I think liability questions are one of the biggest ones that people are grappling with when you're looking at geological reservoirs. And there has been a lot of progress in transferring that liability in the long run once it reaches like a functional stability, right? Like if you can functionally see the plume has stopped, sorry, the plume, the CO2 that you put underground, like it's functionally stopped moving, it's perhaps mineralized, so it's like reacted with rocks in there and it's created this like nice chemical structure and it's stabilized. So it's functionally stopped reacting, moving, transporting, perhaps leaking, or the risk of leaking. So if you've hit that functional stability, there's work being done on like trying to transfer liability to long-term partners. The most common that come to mind, right, are your government entities. Governments have been around and will likely be around for a long time. So transferring that liability from, say, the operator and the owner of that injection site to, say, the state government or the local or the countrywide government is a really interesting concept to me about long-term liability and what is the best way to do that. There's also insurance policies people are trying to create, and I think those are all really interesting ways, but it's worth saying that liability has a lot of market mechanisms to address it. And there are options that people have been, investigating and developing out. And I feel pretty confident that long-term liability, especially with what we know of the geologic reservoirs and such, is something that can be tackled.
Okay. I have to say, I really like your point earlier that durability doesn't mean quality. Like it could be a component of it, but there are many ways of thinking about quality. So, okay. Another interesting question we got is how do buyers set their budget? Is it based on like a target price per ton? Is it based on the social cost of carbon? I think there's probably yes to every possible way of setting a carbon purchasing budget. But I'd be curious, Nina and Sam, like what have you seen or done yourselves?
So, I mean, we approach it really triangulating. I mean, there's no perfect price index you can go get. And we do look at it as what's the social cost of carbon? What's the activity cost of the carbon we're doing? And, we use those to really kind of triangulate and frankly, what's available on the market? Where are we? And by doing that, we come up with a, target price per ton that says this is what we want to achieve in a given year. And you also need to look at what can you afford, and your strategy, where do you want to be, and what can you actually afford to invest, and then use that to determine here's your target price, and that gives you what you need to go start trying to source these types of offsets.
Yeah, and if I could just build on that, it depends. What we frequently see is in parallel, a partner is looking to understand the carbon footprint, right? What is the number of tons of carbon that they want to act on that year? And then in parallel, they're trying to get as much budget as they can to support in that effort. And then those two meet somewhere in the middle with a target price per ton that you want to hit with your portfolio of solutions. So a little more art than science, but it is a combination of those different things.
Okay. All right. So a question, Amishi, I think this one is a good one for you. Your slide about forest restoration said MRV is low. And so we got a question of why do you think MRV is low? What's the state of technology for MRV on ecosystems?
Yeah, that makes sense. So it said ease of MRV, so it's like how accessible or how readily done is MRV. And for open systems, just generally speaking, it is relatively harder than say in these engineered systems where you say for DAC, right? You can have sensors deployed, you have an injection site, you can measure that carbon flow to a high degree of accuracy. When you're looking at open systems like forest, that MRV can take multiple different formats. It can be, like on-site visits. You could measure biomass, you can measure tree trunks if you need to. But really it's a lot of geospatial information. It's monitoring also on the ground, making sure like fire, understanding the risk of fire, droughts, disease, logging, and also the fluctuations that happen naturally within a forest. So the ease of MRV in this open system with a lot more carbon intakes, carbon outtakes that happen with a living, breathing forest, and the risks that can happen to that carbon sink, that stock that's built up there is a lot higher. So that's what I meant by the ease of MRV is low. There's just more complexity. You got to deploy more technology. It'll take more resources, and there's more things that you need to consider when you're looking at your MRV equation.
Okay. Yes, so you're trying to say the world is complex. The Earth is a complex system that is far beyond anybody's understanding. Okay, another question. We talked about having like blended portfolios or like multi-pronged approach of removals and avoidance credits. And somebody asked, if avoidance credits can't count towards a science-based net zero target, an SBTI net zero target, how could a sustainability team advocate for that mixed approach? Nina, do you hear anything from the diversity of types of buyers you work with?
Specifically as it relates to SBTI, I might be about to put my foot in my mouth here, and Sam or Mishi can correct me, but I think most of the guidance to date, like one, not perfectly clear and continuing to evolve, and two, encouraging beyond value chain emission reductions. And I don't think it specifically distinguishes between avoidance and removal there, encourages removal and working towards removal. But and again, you two might need to correct me on that, but I believe that's how it's currently set. Then to go kind of higher level, right? I sit on a sustainability team. I am working to figure out my carbon credit or offsetting strategy internally. I want to make the case for avoidance alongside removal. What we do frequently see there is a partner will, for example, want to focus on a geography that means something to them, their team, their customer base, and perhaps they really care about, SDG #1, eradicating poverty over time. And so they'll have those two requirements, and those things are meaningful for them as they think about their portfolio of what they're doing. And it may be easier to meet that with an avoidance project as opposed to a removals project. And so it is again saying, all right, we can do based on our strategy and our priorities, and those will look different company to company. We think we can do more like for our money if we're supporting this diversity of solutions.
Okay, you're taking me back to the North Star, basically. Like,
yeah, I think I am.
Yeah. I really love that concept. Amishi, do you see customers at Rubicon talking about like, how are we going to advocate like internally? Like, how am I going to go back to my board and talk about having this blended approach?
Yeah, I think the sales team is engaged with a couple of our customers like that. But again, I'm going to be double clicking on Nina's comments. Like especially when they're aligned to something in particular, like a geography, we've actually seen that play out, right? That is a compelling case to kind of shift and break down those barriers of removals versus avoidance. Having that North Star sometimes can help you view projects and not just with that singular binary of removals versus avoidance. So yeah, North Star, I guess, as well.
I mean, the other thing, Nina referred to SBTI, and right now, SBTI does not include any beyond value chain mitigation except for the last little percent, right? It's really you need to get to kind of net zero. And then with what's remaining, you can actually do this. And that's where, I think the value of something like an SBTI is creating those frameworks. They're still wrestling with what counts and what doesn't, whether it's avoidance or whether it's technology or other types of things. Is it sustainable aviation fuel? That this is an evolving landscape, and we can't wait until 2049 to address the 2050 problem. We have to start now and investing in some of these technologies and some of these types of things, even if it's conserving land or doing something that it's a critical step. We can't cut down all the trees and decide in 2049 we better go put the forest back. So we need to start acting today.
Yeah. All right. I think I'm going to sneak one more question in here, which is, so Sam, you brought up the fact that Bain is not just dealing with ongoing emissions, but actually compensating for historic emissions. That is very leading edge. Not a lot of companies have made commitments like that. And so we got a question about whether folks are seeing that as a growing trend, especially amongst either individual, like high net worth individuals, or other companies making legacy carbon emission commitments. So Nina or Mishi, have you seen that as a growing trend?
There are definitely other entities that I have seen doing it. I think Microsoft, very high profile there. To the point on high net worth individuals, like, yes, I know there are a few very high profile folks who are on a mission to essentially remove all of the carbon they have been responsible over the course of their lifetime. Growing trend, like cutting edge. It is cutting edge leadership there.
And I hope they are. Like, I can't confirm or deny. I'm not aware of those conversations. Sadly, I feel like I come in and talk to people. I'm like, yeah, this technology is great. These projects are great, X, Y, and Z. But fingers crossed, people are leaning into what like Bain folks are doing. I think that would be awesome.
It is extremely ambitious, and I would just say it makes so much sense with the removals mindset. Like, this has been my impact on the planet to date, and I'm going to take that back out of the atmosphere. So, oh my, okay, this has been really fun. So thank you all. I'm going to walk through just a couple of closing remarks, which is, well, first of all, thanks to you. And we have two amazing people behind the scenes making this whole thing look very smooth. So I have to say a very big thank you to Julia Weimer and Rachel Somerville for doing all of the technology. I could not do this without you. This webcast recording will be available on greenbiz.com. You can see all of the webcasts, and we're also going to email it out to everybody who attended today. So look for that in your, well, anybody who registered actually, look for that in your inbox. There's also this resources section at the, that you can see the tab for it on the left side of your screen. There's a number of interesting resources in there. I encourage you to download. A couple of white papers about the state of CDR technology, a deep dive on risk adjustment for carbon credits, and the slides from today, and my favorite chart from Amishi with the durability and price correlation. So please go in there and download those resources. And with that, we're at time. So thank you all so much for joining. I'm Margaret, and I look forward to seeing you at future webcasts.
Thank you.